and 4.
We're here again to for the bond referendum agreed upon procedures committee meeting with the board members. We're going to talk today about the responses that we received for the RFI. So we put this out as you all asked me to do. I put it out on that date and we got 3 responses. I created a summary of the responses all together. It's basically just a condensed version to give us what everyone says. So the first page just talks about who the respondents were, and then we talk a little bit about what they agreed upon. And so some of the things that the 3 firms that we had agreed upon were, let's see, they believe that we need to rethink the AUP versus an advisory consulting type of a contract. So basically they said that all 3 firms indicated that some sort or all of the requested procedures in the RFI might be better suited for an advisory or consulting services rather than an agreed upon procedures, AUPs. They explained that AUPs have limitations regarding opinions, assurance, and recommendations. They asked, or they suggested that we clarify the scope and specifications for accuracy, for accurate quoting. They requested probably more specific details regarding the number of projects, transactions, contracts, definitions, terms, variance, accuracies, completeness, to provide more accurate quote and timeline. So whenever, if anyone wants to respond to an RFP, they're gonna, just like we talked before, the scope has to be detailed so they can have a good enough price range to give us. Need for clear expectations and communication. So there were 2 firms that highlighted the importance of clear understanding, expectations, and consistent communication between the district and the selected firm. So they just wanted to make sure that that was something that we made sure we added in there. Some differences that they had, or did you guys want to talk about the suggestions between, or you want to talk about them separately as we go through them?
I mean, I think you can kind of give a review.
Overview, okay. So then some of the differences that they noted, the budgets were very different between all 3. I believe as I read it, 2 of them were quoting more so or giving information more so if we were to do a consultant. And then the last one that is super high, it's a lot, is quoting for the AUP based on what I understood it to read. The timelines were a little different. One said that they could start immediately if they were chosen. 3 to 6 month window would be how long it would take. One said it would take 6 months, and then another, they were really no total duration. They just gave an hourly estimate of how long it would take, and I think it was like 400 hours maybe based on what we had currently. The scope of services, they talked about the limits that an AUP has. Professional standards prohibit AUPs from offering assurance, opinions, or recommendations. Assessing project goal, achievement, and effectiveness of management practices are not permissible under AUPs. Many requested procedures are better suited for advisory or consulting services. They talked a little bit about the terminology and scope, and so they said that we needed to define the variance and clarify the number of projects or transactions for review. Phrases like fair and competitive manner or assesses impact are inconsistent with an AUP. Subjectively, in project outcomes, 3.1 and 3.2 is problematic without objective criteria. They talked about some of the challenges and the risks. Potential for unmet expectations and the understanding that there may be no or many recommendations. The core challenge is ensuring AUPs can meet district objectives despite their limitations. Some of the recommendations that they noted were consider advisory services if recommendations are desired, clarify cost categories and what constitutes a finding. Do not restrict RFP solely to bond-funded projects. Instead, adopt a risk-based approach for selecting projects and testing areas. document sampling, methodology standards, and include provisions for fraud detection. And then they also said maybe a construction engineering architect may be needed. And, okay, so those are all of the recommendations that come directly from their proposals. So, and then some of the things that I just noted, clarifications that we probably need to make to move forward. We need some discussions to clarify the objectives. We need to determine what project type we need to do. Are we still gonna go forward with an AUP after this, or do we need to switch over to advisory or consulting services, or do we wanna go back to what we were saying in the beginning, an audit? We need to talk about that. We need to refine the scope of work. And then we need to consider maybe a phased-in approach where this one, like, give the complexity and cost variations. We can consider a phased-in approach. For instance, the initial AUP agreement engagement could be followed by an advisory phase if further insights or recommendations are needed. So we have some mix of things we could do. Budget, we need to talk about the budget because those are they're variances, they're very different. So we will talk about those things and then we'll move forward to what the possible next steps are depending on what we talk about here.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me go through that.
Oh, no problem.
Absolutely.
I
So-
didn't, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'll let you.
I was gonna ask, Dr. Price, did you have anything, I know that you had reviewed it, is there anything that you wanted to bring out on any of these?
Nothing specifically. I think that the summary is really good, and it will be important for us to have a discussion about the direction that we take from here as far as how we want to focus the project type. And I think it goes back to the question we're trying to answer by going through this process, and that's where our board members will need to really take a look at the different options that have been presented, whether we're going to continue with agreed upon procedures, shift to advisory, or go back to an audit. And whatever the decision is, we need to make sure that regardless of which direction we go, that we're still getting the answers to the questions that we wanted to ask. So I think that'll be very important in determining which direction we take from here.
So it appears that everyone that responded are all pretty much saying that advisory is probably more in line. So a question I have is, and I'm actually okay with that, but what is, and maybe y'all can help with this, the difference between the advisory consulting versus an audit? What is the difference between those two?
So with an audit, they're going to actually be able to give an opinion whether something is correct, materially correct. With an advisory, they're just giving you guidance and recommendations. It's not providing an opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning towards,
What do you, I know that,
I can tell you that if some of these budgets were sticker shocks, an audit will be much higher than that. So I think it would be great to narrow the scope down and determine what questions you want answered. And I kind of liked the combination of an AUP followed up with advisory services if needed. But you would have to really narrow that scope down to, we want you to review these X, Y, Z and tell us if A, B, C. You have to actually say exactly what you want them to answer.
So some of the things that I had put in the next steps, because you do have some options here. So you can revise it and you can put out the RFP. So revise it and do exactly as you've been doing, just decide on the 3. One of the other things that you could do is if you decided to do straight consulting that way, I would make a suggestion. So there is a board-approved exemption that allows you to go straight into contract with an auditor if the board approves upon it, and you don't have to do a procurement method. We try to stay away from that, and we try to do some type of procurement, right? So you could do an RFQ to qualify. So you could qualify a few firms, and you could do one or two things after. You could do an RFP after, or you could go and use that board exemption to do a contract with someone to do advisory services. And the reason I say that is because that contract could clarify the scope between the two. Whereas if you do an RFP, you have to put your scope in there, and you cannot discuss that. You can negotiate it before you award, but when you negotiate, remember, you're negotiating scope. It's either your price is going up or it's going down. So scope adds price or it takes it away.
So an RFQ allows us to,
Qualify based on their professional standards. Just auditors are one of those professions that are very similar to physicians. Sorry. Very similar to physicians, right? You wouldn't go to a physician because they're the lowest price. You would want to go to the best. So auditors, we can do it in that way too, and that's why it's a board exemption, because we want to be able to go to the best when we need to. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm used to that because that's
Yeah.
kind of everything I do is qualifications based.
Architects and engineers are always, you can't even ask them for price in this state without.
No. So yeah, I'm push that back. So yeah, and I'm kind of, and I think Chris is close. So I'd get his feedback.
Okay. And we can talk through a little bit of
Yeah,
that.
because
But
should we share one?
But I will say that the two-step process. All right. Is that good? Can you hear? Guess we'll find out. I do like the two-step process, and the way I say that is one, it gets us the qualified firms that we want to do. And then in that process, through the scope negotiations and everything else, they can help kind of take kind of what we have, because there's another saying, we can't take what we have into that when we're talking to them, and kind of narrow that down and then negotiate after the fact. So I like that just because we'd get the subject matter experts in on the scope to help what we're actually looking for. And then, but I still think we'd have to figure out if we wanted a agreed upon procedure or the other way. So.
And we have to decide on that before we go the RFQ route. We would need to decide that first or no?
no, because you do need to decide on it,
Right.
like soon. But because what you're going to do is qualify them and tell them in the RFQ, we can say we're qualifying them for audit services. Yeah, audit services that we can give basically a generic. Something like that. So because regardless of what we're asking them to do, we're going to ask for the qualifications of whatever you all are looking for. Most of the time it's based on their firm, who they have, those types of things.
I will say that like a consulting firm may not be an audit firm, so they may not be able to do an audit. So it would be important to know which direction.
Yeah, I agree. And I think along when you do the two-step process, especially when we're talking about budget, we'd be able to talk. This is what we're looking for. We're like, and if it's some exorbitant amount of money, then we can start cutting scope here and narrow down to these are definite items and these are maybe items. So I mean, I like that approach because I'm used to that approach, but.
So we'll wait for Mr. Rice to come in, and then we'll talk a little bit more. Let him get his opinion in here. How you doing today? Good. Yeah.
That one. When you go to speak, just turn your mic back on. We got them off because they were reverbing really bad.
So all we did was go through a little bit. We went through I don't know if you had a chance to see the summary that I put together. Okay, good. So you're a step above. So we talked a little bit about the summary. We talked about the recommendations, the things that the three firms agreed upon, the things that they didn't agree upon, the budget. And so we were basically talking through determine the project type, an AUP versus advisory consulting, or we were saying maybe we need to go back to an audit. But we were discussing price tag as well. So Ms. Miller said that an audit obviously is going to be expensive. Advisory is more like an hourly basis. If advisory, I think a lot of what I read, advisory would be more like an hourly basis. So you could even do a not to exceed amount with them and say, this is what I'm going to give you when you get there. We got to talk about that. An AUP, it seemed like between the three firms that gave us information, an AUP didn't seem like the best path forward, but that was my take on what I read. So do you have any comments that you wanted to add in there? And Dr. Price is on the phone as well, just so you know.
Is it on? Yes. I guess the only thought I had was we originally began saying we didn't want to do an audit. We wanted to do an agreed upon procedure. And the reason for that was to keep them from having to render an opinion, right, wrong, or whatever. But the feedback I was getting is they seem to be thinking that we want an opinion, so they're steering us from doing an agreed upon procedure. So I saw that, and then I wondered for the one vendor that was so tremendously high, are they thinking this is a full, complete audit, and they're looking at it that way to render it? So I was like, I thought it was going to be cheaper to do agreed upon procedure, but I was reading it appears like it's going to be more expensive to do an agreed upon procedure. So that's why you have to help me with the financial world.
No problem. Agreed upon procedures would be more cost effective, but they have to be completely spelled out exactly what question are you trying to answer, exactly what do you want them to do, and when they do it, what do you want them to tell you. So that would, if we could narrow that scope down, that could be a possibility still. An audit would be significantly higher because they're taking on a higher risk because they are providing an opinion. So that would definitely be more costly to do an audit, but you can go that direction. And then advisory services would be an hourly basis. And again, that just depends on how long and how many things you have them looking at. And that could have a significant cost as well, depending on, I definitely would recommend a not to exceed, and it would involve constant communication with the board and the firm to know where they're at, where you draw the line with, okay, that's enough, we have what we need, or we need to increase the budget.
So I do have one question. Overwhelmingly in the proposals, it seemed like they were talking about how key the first meeting would be to understand expectations and what you're asking for. And it seemed like one other feedback point they had was, I think the statement we have about any other project that hasn't been completed, it seemed like they were trying to get their heads wrapped around, are we talking about 10, are we talking about 20, or are we talking about 15? So I guess what I was wondering is, at this point, do you grab a number and say it's 8 projects and they're this size? Because I don't want to do what you mentioned earlier, Ms. Franklin, that is you start off in the RFP and then you change things and you have to start all over again. So I was trying to figure out from RFI to actual RFP, what are we charged with quantifying for them now? And will that get you an even better price than some of the other two? I mean, the other two were in a similar ballpark with each other, but then one was way out. So I was trying to understand that difference.
go. I do have the number of checks, the number of transactions, and the dollar amount for the 3 projects. We do want to have some discussion today about the 4th project to get clarification on that one. And then, as you mentioned, all other projects, it would depend how many. We would just pick a date and say, okay, as of this date, it would be no more than this, because we would hopefully close some of them by the time the work began.
So one of the things that we spoke about probably as you were walking in, we talked about one of the suggestions or the paths forward that we could choose is an RFQ, which is a request for qualifications. You're probably used to that in your world. So you can qualify these firms, auditors or auditing firms, however we're going to go about it. We could qualify them based on their experience and all of those things. Then, after we qualify them, we could have meetings with the qualified and get their understanding of what we're looking at putting out, because it would only go out to the qualified, because we've qualified them, right? And so it would only go out to those 3, or how many ever. I'm saying 3 because it's 3 here, but it could be how many ever we decide. It would only go out to them, but we could make sure that they have a clear understanding of what they're getting and what we're asking. Whereas when you do a regular RFP, the only you can talk to industry ahead of time like what we did, or we could have a meeting, a pre-solicitation meeting with industry and let them understand. But the only other option that you have is when you put an RFP out, you have a pre-proposal meeting where you sort of go through the solicitation process and you tell them about, like, this is the scope, and they get to ask questions. But sometimes it's not very clear by that either. So if they don't ask the right questions, then it doesn't get clarified sometimes. So in my experience, I've always found things that are question marks in vendors' brains or consultants' brains they just throw money at it, because I don't know what it's going to be, so I'm just going to put more money to it. And so that's where you get the higher dollar. And that's probably what happened with the last, because it was $1 million between their range. So yeah, that's what we were talking about, was the RFQ, and they had just a couple of questions about that. So if you have some, you can let me know that too. And I put that on the back so you all, I'm not sure how much everyone knows about everything, so that's why I sort of put things to know.
So the question about the RFQ, how do we determine who is eligible for the RFQ? Or, I mean, are there people that we look at our state procurement code and we say we're going to try them? Because I noticed one of the vendors we had was from North Carolina. They were out of state. So it's just, how do we determine what that pool will be for the RFQ?
So the RFQ, we'll do the same. We'll post it on Skibo, and it'll go out to everyone. So when we post to South Carolina Business Opportunities, it goes out to a lot of businesses that are registered with the state of South Carolina. But also, I've noticed that a lot of different Construction Connect and all of those people, they pick up those advertisements and they post them different places. So we get a lot of advertisement from Skibo. So it could go everywhere. We also could send it out to anyone that we want to. I do that. I actually manually sent this RFI out to every vendor that was on Department of Ed auditing list. And some of them don't even do school district procurement audits anymore.
Okay.
But the RFQ is to get the biggest pool possible, and then you get a evaluation panel to come together, and then we have a set criteria that we go through and we qualify them. And once we qualify them, that's basically putting them on a short list.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that short list, we can follow the process that I think you all use with consultants. We can get them to understand our scope before we're putting it out, to make sure that we're doing the best thing possible and we're getting the best price possible. And there's not things happening that they're throwing money at because they don't understand.
Nick, this is your world. So, I mean, a RFQ, I mean, it sounds like a great idea, but I guess what I'm wondering is, it's probably the right thing to do, but does that take more work?
All right, so I'm used to doing RFQs because that's what I do. So as far as more work, I mean, yes and no. I think with the RFQ process, the first step is you dial down the firms that you know are going to be the best for this project. And then from there, after you get that short list and the opportunity to speak to them, you can go over the scope with them. And then if we need to fix this, fix that, go through it and make changes to stuff, then we get their subject matter expert helping us put it all together. And then, like I said, we can send it out to them, or I think we can go to the highest qualified too, couldn't we? Can we just pick one and go straight in, or do we have to do the RFP?
So you all are
We don't have to.
in a position where you can use that one, but you would have to use the board exemption to be able to move into contract with them.
That's fine.
So we have a board, I'm sure that you're aware, we have a board-approved exemption list that the school district uses. And one of the line items on that is auditors. As long as they're approved by the board, it's the same as like legal firms that we use. So you can do an RFQ to qualify, and that's a public process. Anybody can do it. Anybody can come into that process. But then once you have it and your highest rank, and we can clearly put in there what we're going to do, then you can use your board exemption to say, board, this is who we want to go into contract with. And you obviously would have to figure out that contract before you go into it, but then the board can approve you all to go forward with this not to exceed contract, if that's how you all want to move forward.
Rather than put out an RFP at that point.
I mean, either way, to me, I like the two-step process. I say that because I'm used to it, but I guess I'm a little biased on that. But it gives us opportunity to get feedback more than what we just did with an RFI. We can work all the scope issues out, and then we can make it, in the RFQ part, make it vague enough where it's for this, but if we only want to do this section, that section, and that, and then also help when we get to budgeting. Hey, this is like we need like I was telling them before you walked in. Here's our definitely need tos, and then we can have the want tos that kind of help us with the budgeting. So, and then that helps us in the budgeting process as well. So,
Which we haven't really set a budget,
well,
but now we know kind of what this would
Yeah.
be.
and like I said, we know a full-blown audit's going to, of course,
Right.
cost a lot more money than agreed upon procedure, or an hourly rate could really get up there too.
Oh, for sure.
Because the hourly will start
I
adding
like
up
that.
real quick.
It's based on what we had there, I would personally think that the consulting services would be more in line with the first two, the lower two of the what they proposed for dollar amount. The larger amount, I believe, was them looking at the AUP and saying all of this and our hourly rate, and this is how many hours it's going to take. And I think that, and it was a lot of uncertainty for them. Yeah, so.
And there was even some disparity between the timing that it would take on it. So I was kind of like, our timing is moving, our money is moving. I was kind of like, I don't think we failed, but I was kind of thinking, I don't know if this got us any closer. And so that was my big concern.
I think, so I will say, we did save not going out on RFPs and then getting all of the RFP responses and saying, wow, we can't award them. So we did save that. So in my procurement opinion, that is a win. Because it's a lot of time to put that out, and then I've had it before where I have no responses or nothing that I can award. So that's like 6 weeks.
Yeah, so
to get back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely glad we went through this process because we learned some stuff from the industry, and that's what we wanted to do. And then, I also like, oh, my cup keeps falling down. I also like, a phased approach too. I mean, and we could even do that with the spell it out, where the first step is like, hey, here's all the information, here's our agreed upon procedures, and then from that we were like, we we might need a little bit, more to that. We got some more questions, and then we could, do a phase 2 of the contract and go into any opinions or anything else we may, or other questions. I mean, I think it's going to add a little bit more time. I mean, they always do when you have a 2-step process. But I think when we're doing this, we want to make sure that we're getting the best information possible. I mean, I know we'd like to have some stuff before other things happen, but I think definitely we want to make sure. And I believe, yeah, thanks. And I believe with an RFQ, we can put in criteria that we want them to look at for us, like for their qualifications, like.
We could say, maybe.
Like time and availability. I mean, like time and availability.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I'm
yeah,
making sure.
Yes.
That way, we don't pick a firm
That's
like
how
we.
we qualify.
Well, yeah. I mean, we can do it, but it's going to be a year from now, so their availability is nowhere close to what our availability is.
And also, who do they have on there? Do they have enough staff?
Yeah.
Do they have any of those things? The other thing that you did get, and I'll bring this out, is the timeline. So all of them, even though they were a little different, none of them said over a year. So, and we had talked about a year, starting it, so within that year. So I think that it looks like, based on what they saw, that's what it was. Now, it could take longer, but we have, based on that.
That was for AUP. So do you think the timeline would change if we did?
I know that one said 400 hours. Based on, was it the AUP? 400 hours? Yeah, their highest was 400 hours. The other ones, I don't think gave hours, they just gave dollars.
And I would say with the AUP, if you'll notice some of the comments that were written, they can't give opinions on some of the stuff that was very subjective. So that's the part, if you could work on that scope, it's still possible to do an AUP. It's just you would have to work on that, and it's not really giving an opinion. It's telling them exactly what you're looking for, and once you find it, let us know.
With the RFQ, can we be a little bit more frank with when we sit down, after we qualify or while we're qualifying? Would it give us the ability to say, here's our concerns, like here's some things that, or does that make sense?
Yes, I think with you all, because it would be a public meeting, most of the time with vendors, it's a public meeting, so depends on
What you want to say?
what you want to, yes, because I'm not sure, and I'm not saying that anyone's hiding anything or anything like that, but I know that there are some things that are public, you want public to know now, and then there are some things public can't know until after, right? And so same thing in the procurement process. So it depends on what it is. So we can talk a little bit more about that if you all would like, but there's sort of a lot, because it would be a public process.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out how we can get to where we really want to get without beating around the bush, if that makes sense.
Now,
I know there's some red tape and we have to jump through hoops and stuff on paperwork, but
when you go, if you were to do use the exemption and go direct contract with someone, contract negotiations are able to go into executive session. You cannot make a decision, you cannot vote on it, but you can do contract negotiations in executive session. You can also do contract negotiations in an RFP, but that's when you're getting ready to award, so it'd be too late, if that makes sense.
Well, I think we all agree that we all agree on the RFQ moving forward. So what would be the next thing that we would need to discuss?
We need to come up with a list of qualifications. I can do some research to find some and give you guys maybe a list of things.
Because we kind of did that, right, before. We talked about, what was important to us.
There was a list of qualifications for the RFP, so what you were looking for, what we wanted them to provide.
Right.
I'll look at some other solicitations, even in other states that maybe have done the same thing. One of the things I was taught in procurement is don't reinvent the wheel. Somebody's already
Yep.
done it and they did a great job. I can do that in procurement.
You'd be surprised.
Yes.
You go to another state, it might look exactly like another state.
Exactly. But I can do some of that research for you all to look
Okay.
into it and then bring forward so you all can have the best qualifications. The good thing on auditing is we can also ask for price range because it's not an architect or engineer because you can't ask them for anything. But auditors, we can ask what's your hourly rate and your listing of each. If you have a principal, this is what it's going to be. So we would want to document, hey, this is what you told us. So, yeah, I can work on some of that.
If we could today, just get clarification on the one project so we have the right number of transactions. It was the project that we have been referring to as the Centerville Elementary School. I wanted to make sure that truly is the school and it wasn't one of the other Gilbert locations or projects.
It said with the list originally had Gilbert Elementary School, like new Gilbert Elementary School. But I think everyone was assuming it was Centerville because that was the one that was constructed with the bond referendum. So
And I think Tracy has the board approved. She gave it to me yesterday, what was approved in the board, and it is the new GES.
yeah,
Right,
So-
which is Centerville.
Just want to make sure it's not the Gilbert Primary New GES or the Gilbert Elementary existing building. Those were the two other Gilbert projects.
Yep. It's just on what your intention was. Centerville is the new building that is a elementary school in Gilbert. The old Gilbert Primary is the new Gilbert Elementary. So I don't know what was intended, but that's
it's also the old Gilbert Elementary.
that's right.
The new old,
This may be where I got confused because I pulled it off of the, and I don't know that I was privy to all of the meetings, the board meetings. So I pulled it from the bottom, from up here somewhere or down there somewhere. And so I may have gotten the wrong.
So a quick recap, the Centerville was a $33 million project. The new GES was a $3.4 million project. And then the other one, that is where there was an $89,000 cost.
Well, so I may be able to clarify. I think there was some, and I need you all's help too. I think there was some question about the old Gilbert Elementary School that is now being used for targeted violence. There was some confusion about that project and whether we did what we were supposed to do with that project or not. I don't really remember the Centerville discussion, but
well, I think what you're referring to is the promise, the verbiage during the bond referendum process on campaigning, selling kind of thing, that referendum to the public, things were said that they would like to do, right? But then it didn't end up getting done. But on the actual ballot, that those things were not listed on the ballot. So people were not voting on specific projects. Therefore, people can be upset that this project didn't get done, but at the end of the day, we really did not do anything wrong, technically. Is that what you're referring to? Because they wanted that old Gilbert Elementary that's now the SLED to
Right.
be the primary or the preschool.
yeah, but I mean, for the purpose of what we were doing here, I don't remember it being a major discussion point about Centerville. I know it was Lakeside. I know it was South Lake. I know it's the transportation facility. But Centerville is a new build, so we probably would want to see where we were with that too.
Yeah, and the reason I thought we were saying the new GES or new Gilbert Elementary School was at the time of the referendum, I don't think a name was for that school yet. So it would have said New Gilbert Elementary. And so that's what I've always based it on. And then as far as the 4K stuff at the school, it would be hard to look at a procedure for a project we didn't even complete.
Right.
Because there'd be nothing there to look at. So.
I would say, as far as Centerville, what we could do as we go through it, if it's okay, and we can keep it on the list, but that might be one of the things that kind of falls to the bottom of our priorities. If we end up having to narrow the scope. Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I follow what you're saying. I have no problem with having the 4 solid projects, South Lake, Lakeside, Transportation Facility, Centerville. I have no problem. I think the old GES that we were talking about earlier would fall under the category of any other project that's not complete.
No, she's saying no.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, did we officially close out that project on our line item list on the bond referendum, or is it still showing a $1 million balance
On which project?
for the old GES? Remember, it was a line item that was. She took.
I still call it Gilbert High School.
Yeah, it is closed out. Okay.
Was a board approval to transfer the money remaining in that project to the other Gilbert project. And so that is a closed project that would not be tested.
So I'll say in the mic, got it. And I'm comfortable with that. I just wanted to make sure, because I know when we originally started tossing this around, we talked about that, but I didn't think that it was in our list. So Centerville represents that. I'm good with that.
So we're all good with the Gilbert primary new GES, because that's what the board approval was. This is what Tracy had on the motion, Gilbert primary new GES, which would have been that.
Centerville. No.
That would have been the
Current, which is neither of the two we just discussed, just to make sure. So what got approved was a $3.2 million project, which is the current Gilbert Elementary School, which used to be called Old Gilbert Primary. So that is neither the SLED location or Centerville. So the board did approve that it was the current Gilbert Elementary School.
So we need to go back and look at that and see what we were intending. Yes, sir. We need to go back and see what we were intending there.
Yeah, I have no problem with using either one.
Well, one's 3 million, one's 33 million. And I'm not sure, I'm really not, I know the questions in the back of my mind on the other 3 projects, but those I really don't, nothing like comes to my mind as far as what we were trying to get answered.
Yeah, my main 3 were transportation, Lakeside, and South Lake. I mean, those were the main 3.
Can we, I know you want to get that settled today, but is.
Well, it doesn't have to be settled today.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to make sure that my paperwork was correct.
Okay.
Because what I put out was that the new GES Centerville Elementary School.
Okay,
And then,
but that's not what we approved.
yes, and
Okay.
so that is completely on me, and I apologize.
No,
that I had the wrong thing.
clearly we were all confused.
But I did want to make sure the right thing gets put in.
Yes.
So when we do move forward, so now I have my brain right, but if you all want to change it during your next board meeting.
We'll have to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
easy peasy.
Thank you.
Which will be, I guess, in July.
July 14th.
That's a quick meeting then.
Yeah. Most likely be August. But the purposes for how our committee is operating now, if we operated under the existing motion that we approved, the only thing is you have a fourth project kind of wagging out there in the wind that you may not have intended, but
I think you're right. If we moved forward with a RFQ, you could still do that, get firms qualified, then at the August board meeting, before you're negotiating contracts,
Good, yeah.
you could get that adjusted if need be.
yeah,
Because
I
we
think,
want to keep the wheels turning.
I was going to say, otherwise you get ready to grind it to a halt for 2 more months, and I don't think we want to do that.
Okay.
Procurement never stops.
Right.
So, yes, thank you so much for that discussion.
Okay.
I want to get that straight when we go through that. So was there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up?
Budget, do we want to talk about that, guys, or are we just going to kind of wait and see what we get with the call?
I mean, I think we kind of have, I mean, I kind of have, I kind of have a good idea what I'm thinking this is going to run just from what I've seen.
Like, what is that?
Probably between those bottom two numbers.
Between 58
175?
and 150?
I thought they were.
Wouldn't it?
And I would say, with past experience of being an auditor, I'm not quite sure how they gave us a quote without knowing how many transactions,
Can we go from 170?
because
What was the bottom number? Because I thought it was
you
175.
wouldn't, that's like, please build me a house, but not telling you if you want 2 stories, single story, brick, siding.
1,200 square feet or
Right.
50 or
So
5,000 square
I
feet?
think they are true just estimates,
Yeah.
and I think we really don't have a good projection of what it would actually cost until we narrow that scope down.
If you
Yeah.
look, if you're able to look at the Malton and Kingston, he actually did put a hourly rate and hours, so that's how he got his number. So
Right.
if you think it's going to be the 400 hours, that's the high amount at whatever his fee was, blended rate, then that's how he got his number. So it wasn't actually on transactions, it was just putting hours to it. I think that the third, the highest, with it having $1 million in between, it was, like we said, it was, they answered our question.
They did.
They answered the question.
Could these firms still go,
Yes,
come
absolutely.
back for it?
Absolutely. And I will definitely, out of courtesy, send it to them, because, they were the 3 that actually did answer us and give us the information, so we're greatly appreciative of that. And if anyone else has any lists that they would like for me to send that to when we do, I'll gladly send it to them.
I see what you're talking about. The low on one of those other bids was 175, so you're saying probably somewhere between the low on one to the low on the second one,
Yeah, I mean,
somewhere in that range.
I agree with Jennifer. You're not going to get a true estimate because I've dealt with these before until they dig in, and
They don't know.
but I'm not thinking it's going to be at that third firm either. So
2.35 million.
yeah,
Well, and also, if you all decide to do an RFP, we can also put a budget amount in there. I normally do not put budget amounts into RFPs because sometimes we get right there, or, but if we have a budget amount and we're not going to go over that, we don't want people to put in a proposal that is going to be $2 million when we don't have it. Because if we get 3 at $2 million and none at our budget, we can't award it, and you can't negotiate scope enough to get from 2 million to 200,000. Like, you can't. You can have them walk in the door. That's all you can have them do. So
there is no best and final offer.
yeah, no, not really. But I would suggest, if you have a budget, we can put a ballpark in there to get proposals, if we do an RFP.
And again, just a reminder, the more you narrow that scope down to exactly what you're looking at is going to keep that price in check with the amount of work they're doing.
Yeah, because what's going to happen is if we don't, then they're going to take on the risk. And when they take on the risk, it's going to make that price go up. We'd rather that risk be on us to bring the price down.
And anything that you ask them to do outside of what you had there would just have to be a change order, like if you ask them. Now, you have to be careful with the RFP, because if you've asked them for a scope, but if it's still within the scope and you said, hey, this can be tied to it, then we can do change orders
potentially you could do the RFQ, and could you do a phased approach with them? Like, look at this one project and that's one phase. The next project would be a second phase, the next one a third. I don't
I have to think about that.
think
but
about
I
that.
may be able to structure something that way. It would still be the same firm, like you can't mix or match that,
Right.
right? But you could award it to one, somehow, I believe. I can be creative within the law. Yeah, somehow, but you would also, if you want the option to cancel it before that happens, like say you have one phase and you want you to look at this, and then you find everything you want there, or you don't want to move forward, there has to be an option to cancel the rest of the contract. So that's where it gets a little sticky. You have to have someone that's going to agree to that. But as long as we stay creative within the law, I have to stay within those four corners of the book. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll tell you what I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I
You
would
had a
just say with that phase approach, I mean, yeah, it happens, but I don't know if it's allowed in y'all's procurement, but if you phase it out and the longer it's gonna go, then you're gonna start seeing escalation costs come in, because they're gonna be like, well, we're paying our people more, it's been a year.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
pay their salaries now.
Okay.
So that's something you kind of got to look out for when you get into that escalation, and because there's not going to really be a CPI adjustment on these. It's going to be
Right.
So
Well, let me tell you what I'm thinking. Just so y'all know where I'm tracking. I'm thinking about if I hire a person to come and do my taxes this year. They do it this year. The next year, my tax base doesn't change that much. So when they're coming in, they already know. I kind of know how Chris handles his finances. That's the only phased approach I was thinking about. Once they look at one project and say, hey, now we've got a feel for how Lexington 1 executes a project. Now when I go look at the next one, I would hope they're a little more efficient now because they know how we do things and what to look for. But I don't know how you do that and stay within the confines of procurement.
We do, so just, I'm trying to think through this in my head, but we do, just like the state, we do a 1-year contract with 4 one-year options to renew on almost all of our contracts. And when we do that, the first year is they perform. We have 60 days before the next year, the first renewal, to cancel, or the vendor can cancel, either way. But if not, it automatically renews to year 2, because it always gives us that cancellation time. And that's normally how it is, because sometimes, depending on what they're performing, it may be higher in the first year, and then integration software, right? You pay more upfront and then less the previous next year's. But those are done on yearlies, so I'm not sure that you guys want to wait a year for. And I don't know that I can do them like within 6 months, like renewals within 6 months. I'd have to look at the code to see. So, yeah.
Well, don't let me send you down a rabbit trail. I was
no,
thinking you get your RFQ, then after that, it triggered me because Ms. Miller said that the more you can define it, the less it will cost. And I'm just trying to think, if they're trying to look at all of these different projects at the same time, are they jumping from here to here to here, and that's driving up the cost? Or, I mean, I guess it's up to them as to how they want to do it, how they want to execute is what I'm saying.
I mean, you could also put in the contract. I mean, I'm assuming when it comes to deliverables, we want this deliverable first, so we want this school done first. Get it to us as quick as possible. We want this one done next.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's options we can write to the contract that could alleviate some of that.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about the phased-in approach, also in the summary, it was written in there where you could do an AUP, you could get that done, like maybe a small scale, smaller than what we have here, and then after that, you may have a follow-on contract. You don't have to use it, but a follow-on that would say, we may need you to render opinions after, which would be the advisory. So you would have a 2-step within a 1, right? So, but it would have a follow-on contract to it, if that makes sense. Lots of options. Procurement is really fun because you get to do lots of things.
Yeah. So going back to Ms. McCown's question, so you need to do, our next steps are you want to do some research on what's out there with the RFQs?
Yes, I will look for any RFQs that I can find based on auditing, qualifying auditing firms, and see what I can find on the qualifications. And then we can bring those, I'll bring the ones that make sense for what we're doing. And then we can decide on those, and then the RFQ can go out. And RFQs typically, I would say it's going to be good practice to keep them out for probably about 4 weeks, if that's okay with everyone. Most of the things that we're going to ask for, they're already going to have readily available. We're not going to ask them to like do anything creative. They're already going to have their proposals ready, 9 times out of 10.
Okay.
And then once we have those, we can go into qualifying. And I don't know if you all will have to go to the board to get a group to qualify, or if it will be you all to qualify. So that's one thing that we will have to figure out. So before we get to that point, we will have to figure out who the evaluation committee is. And because this is getting you to the RFP.
I think it's still in
So
the
I think you guys are
confines of
okay.
the committee because this is a step to get you to the RFP.
Okay.
The board has approved us to develop the RFP.
Okay. Okay.
That would be,
that
that'd be
makes-
my assumption. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
If we skip the RFP and went straight, either way, I guess, RFP or,
I think that you have to take, right? Yeah.
the next step.
Okay.
Okay. So if that works for everyone, I will do that research. Is there anything else I can do to help clarify the project, or is there anything else that you all need from me?
No, I don't have anything. I just want to reiterate, and I don't want to speak for both of them, but I know they probably feel the same way, as we appreciate all the work that's gone into this. This is, of course, something I don't think we're taking lightly. And like I said, this process we did with the RFI, yeah, it adds a little bit, but I think the best thing came out of this. So, man, I think that's when we know, because you do not want to get an RFP and you're like, oh, we can't award anything. You gotta start all over again.
Yeah. I'll piggyback what he's saying. I appreciate the effort that you put in. I think the RFI summary was very helpful for me. I was kind of trying to jot notes and, oh, this is this much, this is this much, this is time frame. And then when I read yours, I said, oh, I'm reinventing the wheel. She's already prepared it. So I appreciate that.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad that this has helped. And I know that this has put an extra couple of weeks on it, and I apologize, but like I said, I think that it brought out some good things that you all can think about. Oh,
Yes, Dr. Price.
Thank you. Just one clarifying question for Beth. Yeah, I know that it's been discussed as, we've got the major projects that are going to be looked at, and then there are any other unfinished projects. And my question is, there's a number of things that fall underneath that umbrella. Would it be helpful to have a list of those unfinished projects and whittle that down so that whatever we do next is going to be even more specific than what we've put out so far?
yes, I do agree that that would be good, and to work on that now, and then as they close, because from what I understand, it's at the time that we award, is that correct? Okay, so at the time we award what's available, so as we complete them, we can take them off of the list, so we'll know exactly where we're at.
And I can
would
gather
it
that
be-
data for you, Dr. Price, and I do have the 4 main projects as well. I have the number of transactions, dollar amount, and line items, and number of checks.
So would it be a good idea for this committee to see those projects, to see if there's any that we definitely want to dive into, or any that we can eliminate now?
I think that's a good idea, yes.
Yes, that's a good suggestion.
Mr. Kirby, do we have any that are going to be closing out very soon?
Yes. I need to give them the qualifications, so And I'll have how about if I have a draft together with the qualifications that I see, and then we can go through and that part, and then also, I'm assuming the list of what's left.
Yeah.
Okay, that works.
Dr. Price, is that good with you?
Yes, sir. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I would ask if we could get the list like sent to us as soon as we can, so we can kind of be looking at it, because there may be some that we look at, we're like, yeah, this one's. Just so we know, there may be someone that are like, there's no point in even looking at this one. Because there's some on there, and I know a lot of them are in closeout, so just the quicker we can get that information, the quicker we can get it back and get it done.
I think that sounds good. I think we have a good path forward.
We'll get you an answer on Centerville versus
Okay.
that.
Okay. Okay. We don't have to adjourn or anything. Well, thank you. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
you guys'
your-
time.
For your work.